I've always been interested in those people who make speeches for a living, the professionals, if you will, the ones who speak at conventions and banquets and motivational seminars. They call themselves hired guns. I'll confess a certain degree of envy when I read or hear about these speakers, not because of the exorbitant fees that they receive, understand, but because they can give one speech over and over again. Preachers can't get away with that, at least not very often. We have to write a new sermon every week for the same audience. I'm sure there are some liabilities that come with being a professional speaker on the motivational circuit, but you got to understand from a preacher's perspective, it looks like pretty soft money to me. Now, one of the superstars of that professional speaker circuit is a guy by the name of Charles Garfield. He's a psychologist in San Francisco. He makes 150 speeches a year, he says. Actually, if the truth were known, he makes one speech 150 times, but I'm not bitter about that. He began his career as a mathematician for NASA. He was part of that development that put men on the moon in the Apollo program. He left NASA to study psychology and became interested in what motivates people, what motivates them to reach their highest possible achievement in life. So he went to Berkeley, he got a PhD in psychology, and he interviewed 1,500 people about that very question, how they achieved what he called peak performance. He published his results in a book, and he went on the lecture circuit. Now, I read about the speech that he gave about peak performance. He said the one thing that all peak performers have in common is a sense of mission. Now, that got my attention because mission's our word. Mission's the church's word. What happens, you see, is we get careless with our church words like grace or like mission. We leave them lying around the front yard, and pretty soon somebody comes by and takes them like some piece of equipment you left there. The next thing you know, they're being used out there on the preachers, on the speakers circuit, and preachers don't own them anymore. There's some motivational speaker like Charles Garfield going around saying what you need in this life if you want to have fulfillment is a sense of mission. That's our message. Garfield tries to define mission in this speech. It's bigger than goal setting, he says. It's bigger than a sense of self-fulfillment. It's giving yourself to something greater than yourself. That's what mission is. That's what brings about peak performance, he says, in an individual's life or in a corporation's life for that matter, having a sense of purpose in your life. Now, the rest of Garfield's speech is a series of stories divided into categories. All those motivational speakers have them. He uses them as well. There's the toll booth story. That's the story about somebody who's made to live and work in a very small, confining space, but he or she escapes it because they get a new vision and gain a greater vista. And then there's always the sports story. Every motivational speaker has to use a sports story, of course. And Garfield uses the one about Roger Bannister, who back in the 60s broke the 4-minute barrier for the mile. It was thought at that time you couldn't do such a thing. No human could run a mile in less than 4 minutes, but then Roger Bannister did it. And then everybody else did it. And now we've got high school athletes that run under sub 4-minute miles. So his point was that it wasn't a physical barrier, it was a psychological barrier, if anything. And then, of course, these speakers throw in a healing story about somebody who's facing a life-threatening illness but overcomes it because they have something to do, one more thing to do in their life. It's therapeutic to have a mission, they say. That'll give you the kind of strength in your body to bring about healing. And the conclusion, and Garfield's no exception, is always the male weeper story. That's a story that's so moving and so emotional, even the males in the audience will weep and cry and reach for the tissues on it. It's called the male weeper story, and every motivational speaker ends his speech with a male weeper story. That's the motivational speech. That's the formula it follows. I'm always interested in how these professional speakers construct their message. But what I was really interested in was the substance of what he said. Peak performance comes from a sense of mission in your life. That's our message. We ought to reclaim it. Mission belongs to the church. Mission explains the church. The church is founded to perform mission. There's no other reason for the church to exist except to perform the mission that it was given. The church did not make up its mission. We didn't sit around and wonder, what should our mission be? It was given to us. That mission can be found most clearly in Matthew, the last chapter of his gospel, where he says that Jesus drew those disciples together after his resurrection, before his ascension, and he gave them a mission. He said, go into all the world and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and lo, I'll be with you always, even to the end of the earth. That's the mission. We're given it. We didn't make it up. It's why we're here. We are here because we're in the business of making Christians. We're here because we're supposed to be providing evidence with our lives that the Christian life is the way everyone should be living their life. After people hear Charles Garfield speak, in his motivational speak, they do something. They break out into little breakout groups or buzz groups. The language changes every 3 or 4 years, but you get the idea. And they sit around a table and they put a piece of butcher paper in the middle of it, and they're asked to write down what their mission will be. And they write it down. We don't have to do that. It's been given to us. That mission explains the church. It explains why we're here. It's greater than any dream any individual has. It's transforming this world into being the kind of world that God always intended it to be, because we're willing to live lives that give such evidence of God's love that everyone else would want to live that way too. Now, that mission is given to ordinary folk. Let me say that better. It's given to ordinary sinful folk. Once in a while, somebody feels compelled to make that point to me. They say, I stay away from church because it's always filled with hypocrites. I say, well, that's just a half of it. You ought to see the other half of the church. The church has a checkered history. There's no reason to try to defend it or say anything different. We're a fallible institution. We don't always get it right. But I say there's no reason to stay away from it. In fact, that's a reason to marvel at it. Think about it. The church has survived 2,000 years of mediocrity and misanthropes and mismanagement and muddleheadedness, and it's still here. It's still here. Now, if I'm an investor and you show me a company that survived 2,000 years of mismanagement and it's still there, I tell you, there's some secret to that organization I want to invest in. And there's a secret to us. It's the mission we've been given. The mission from God. That's our word. D.T. Niles, the great missionary, said the church exists for the sake of mission, as a candle exists for burning. There's another fact I want to lift up to you about this thing called the church. Not only does the church have a mission to perform in this world, but everybody in the church is supposed to have a part in performing that mission. And that's why Paul tells the Corinthians in his letter, we call it chapter 12. It never was a chapter in the original letter, but in his first letter, he says it this way. He says the church is made up of people with a variety of gifts, and each person is supposed to find a way to use their gift to forward the mission of the church. Let me use Paul's words. There are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are varieties of service, but the same Lord. There are varieties of working, but the same God who inspires them all and everyone. To each one, no exceptions, to each one in the church is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. Everyone here this morning has something to offer. When you join the church, That was the promise that you made. If you join this church, that is the promise you will make. You will support the mission of the church with your prayers, your presence, your gifts, your service, and your witness. Now, I confess in many churches, not this one, of course, but this in many churches, those are just words we say. People don't really take them seriously. Now, we're serious about money. We want you to give us your money, of course, but we don't care about your service. In fact, we send that message in lots of ways. The church is organized in such a way that only a few people serve on committees. And so people watch that and they say, well, you don't really need my service. There's only 50 people and 3,300 that serve in that way. Well, aren't there other ways to serve? And we send that message because of the very word mission, in the original Great Commission. And Jesus said, go to all the nations and make disciples. So when we think about mission, we think about other places, not this place. And why wouldn't we? Every time we send a group out to a different country, we say there's a mission trip going to Guatemala, or a mission trip going to Honduras or Nigeria or Costa Rica. Mission's always someplace else, so you don't really want my service. There's a great story to be written right where we are, and if we ever wake up to it, we'll do amazing things. We send the message pretty well that, those are just words we say when you join the church, you pledge your service, but we really don't need it. I'm here to tell you that we do. In spite of our best efforts to belittle that word, we need it. We want it. We can't do the work without your service. One of the realities of when we ask people to make stewardship decisions about their prayers or presence or gifts or service or witness, service comes in last place. About half the people in the church will give money to this church, but 1/3 of that half of people who tell us what they'll estimate their giving to be, only 1/3 of even that number will tell us how they plan to serve. We've done a pretty good job of communicating we don't need your service. Well, I'm here today to announce that we do. And so this year, when November 9th comes and we bring our gifts forward, we're going to also ask you, bring a gift of service. I don't want that ratio anymore that just 1/3 of us decide that's all the church needs. Jesus understood that. He knew that service was important, but not always for the reasons that we think. He wasn't trying to give us some new obligation that we didn't do that made us feel guilty, that helped us stay away from church. He was trying to open up a way of living that would be evidence to the world. This is the way everyone should live, serving their neighbor and loving their neighbor and giving themselves to something greater than themselves. Having a mission is bigger than you are. Having a mission will enable you to have peak performance. Having a mission will enable you to get the most out of your life. Now, Jesus says that if you want to understand what my life is all about, then come be a servant. Those people in the government and authorities, they lord it over people, but if you're a part of my kingdom, the way I've asked you to live, you'll become a servant. Elsewhere, Jesus would say, seek first the kingdom of God, everything else will be added unto you. What that means is if you've given yourself to a mission that's greater than yourself, then everything else in your life will fall into place. I understand that in prisons, even in some hospitals, especially with those hospitals that minister to disturbed people, they let them raise pets. They give them animals to care for because it works better than anything else to bring about healing in their lives. Now, the theory is so simple if you think about it. The animal becomes the object of their caring. They give them something outside of themselves to care about. And if you give yourself to something outside of yourself, you're going to feel better about yourself. It's just that simple. It's safe loving a dog or a cat, for those of you who feel such things. It's safe. You know, the dog will appreciate you. The dog will return your attention. The dog will even give you some affection. The dog will even like you for doing this. So if you're severely wounded, then raise a pet. But if you're a healthy and strong and mature adult, it may be time to take up something larger than that, to love your neighbor, someone who's hurting, someone who's poor, someone who's hungry, someone who's lonely, someone who is in need. It will have amazing effects on your life if you will do it, and that's the secret Jesus was trying to let us in on. If you'll live as I've shown you how to live, it will change your life. You do it, you'll see some changes. Now, you won't get wealth and fame. If you're looking for wealth and fame, then look to the world. They will give you those things. But Jesus is willing to teach you how to get what the world can't give you. Isn't that what he said? I give to you, not as the world gives to you. What he gives to us is a sense of wholeness. We use that theological word salvation. That's what it means. Wholeness about our life. He will give to you shalom, another word from the Bible that means peace. The peace that means we're one with God and one with each other and one with ourselves. The peace that allows me to feel at home with myself and at home with my neighbor. I ask you this morning, does anybody want that kind of life? If you do, then listen to what Jesus says to us, this greatest teacher that ever lived. Follow his example and choose to serve. Charles Parkening was a classical concert guitarist. He's about my age now. At the age of 30, he was at the top of his profession. His concert schedule was booked years in advance. His CDs were selling off the racks of every music store around, and suddenly it all stopped. He just disappeared. He stopped recording. He stopped performing concerts. He said he was burned out. He did what a lot of us, I think, are tempted to do with our life. Just chuck it and throw it in. I'm tired. And he had resources to do that. He did. He went and bought a ranch up in Montana with a trout stream that ran through the middle of it. And he became an expert fly fisherman. He decided he would solve all the problems of his life with fishing. Now, I've never lived in Montana, but I'm told it's pretty nice between May and October up there, and you can do all the fishing you want to. And he did. But it's very different the other 6 months of the year. You need to go inside in those months. You need to go inside just to survive if you want to stay alive, and that's what he did. When he couldn't fish, he started to read. And he read books, and he read the Bible, and then one day a neighbor invited him to go to church with him. And he heard this preacher stand up in the pulpit and talk about this life of Christ and living the way Christ wanted to, and all the reasons that people have for not living that way. And he said, that's me. Christopher Parkening said, that's me. That's who I am. He said he had a reawakening. He didn't call it being born again. He said he didn't like that language. He said what happened was a renewal of his faith. The effect it had on him was the effect it had on everybody. He got a sense of mission and purpose in his life. And so now he goes back to playing the guitar that he's so gifted at. But he's a different man now. He's not burned out now. He said he was different because he had a purpose in his life. He said, now my music has purpose. I can give myself to my music because it helps me express what I believe. His mission changed his life. Now, there may be those of you here this morning that feel a lot like Christopher Parkening. That is to say, you've enjoyed some success in life, but now you feel like your life is flat. It's unrewarding. You need something. You need to find a mission for your life. But others of you may feel like Ella Ridgely. Parkening was young, and Parkening was exceptionally gifted. But Ella Ridgely was old, and she just had some common gifts like most of us. While she was in her 70s, her husband died, and she was left alone. She didn't know what to do. She heard about this organization called Vista, this place that does volunteer work to serve communities in America. She inquired about it. They took her in, and she became a part of it. They sent her to South Carolina, where she set up a preschool. They sent her to Oregon, where she worked with immigrant farm workers. In 3 years, her time was up, but Ella didn't quit. She kept going. She lived in San Francisco. And she created little mini parks around the city, little places of grass and greenery where children could come and find a place to recreate in their own life. She turned 80 years old, and she asked for a birthday gift, and she got it. You know what she got? 10 tons of dirt and a bag of worms. Because she said, I wanted to create one more mini park for kids. She says, I feel young, I feel alive, I feel great. You know why? Because she has a mission. You can do that anywhere. But you can also do it right here. You have a mission, and the choice of your service determines whether that mission changes your life and changes the world. If you want to be a part of a church like this, the doors of our fellowship are always open. We invite you to come. If you want to know more about what this Christ could do to change your sense of purpose in living, this all